impairment, you have another student with comprehension impairment, those are not the same thing, and they're not going to need the same intervention. And depending on the degree, they might not even need the same amount of time or the same sort of format. So if, for example, a student, I think this gives great information for classroom teachers at the beginning of the year as well, if they do the screening that way, although that's flexible. But if a classroom teacher discovers that 30% of her classroom, there are students who have struggles with phonological awareness, she could adapt classroom instruction to incorporate more phonological awareness training.
Okay, yeah, and I think you've answered the question, but just to underscore, it's not pushing any one curriculum.
Oh, no.
Okay.
There's no one
I think
curriculum
that's where
that could address
you get
everything.
the pushback from teachers sometimes. So.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Mine is a quick statement and a question. Beatrice, thank you. You did a great job in testifying, and I want to tell you that I am dyslexic. And so to tell you that you can achieve anything you want to achieve, all you have to do is put your mind to it.
Thank you.
As a little girl, I couldn't tell the difference between B's and D's, M and N. I read numbers backwards. And my parents in the Caribbean didn't know what was wrong with me. They thought I was just plain dunce. It was not until I was much, much older that they discovered the word dyslexia. Okay, and it started getting me tutored on one-to-one. So that is so important for the screening to be done earlier, because they say many times dyslexic parents have dyslexic children. And I have a dyslexic son that he was, again, I didn't pick it up, even though I'm dyslexic, because he had excellent auditory memory. So he memorized everything they said. So when the teacher asked him something, he could answer it. Until one day I decided to sit down with him and realize that boy couldn't read. Okay? So that is the reason why the screening and this legislation is so important. So again, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
I have a quick one for Ms. McHale Small. What instrument did you direct your school system to use for the screening?
Well, I was in more than one, and in one of our districts, in one district where I worked, we used AimsWeb, and in one we used Dibbles. In both of those districts, we also supplemented a subtest from the comprehensive test of phonological processing, which was a rapid automatized naming subtest. But there are other RAN screeners that are available that are not associated with the comprehensive test of phonological processing.
Woodcock Johnson, Stanford, Iowa, Star, any of those?
There are some subtests on the Woodcock Johnson that do test that. There are some subtests on the Kaufman test of educational achievement. So there's a large number of possible screening instruments that could fit the requirements of this bill.
Well, that was my question. There are some characteristics or defining terms for kindergarten, first, second grade.
Right.
I'm not seeing it right now, but automatic and fluent single word recognition with nonsense and real words. Mm-hmm. I mean, all of those would.
Yes, there are many
cover those.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, I want to thank this panel. Thank you very much. We're going to move to the next panel, and that would be Diane Gough, Fran Bowman, Audrey Potter, Abby Brocker, Aaron Parker. And let's go with also Rebecca Evans. Sit wherever the microphones will move. And you may proceed in whatever order you choose.
Good evening, Chairman and committee members. My name is Diana Gough, and I work in the English for Speakers of Other Languages, or ESOL office for Prince George's County Public Schools. I am here speaking as a parent and from my experience as an ESOL teacher, but all opinions are my own. I have had the opportunity to teach ESOL students at the elementary, middle, and high school levels, and have seen too many ESOL students struggle to read and understand the curricula. We need to have something in place to help prevent reading difficulties and to help struggling students before they fall too far behind. In 2018, only 10.2% of fourth grade English learners were on grade level in reading, and only 1.8% of our 8th graders and 3.7% of our 10th graders were on grade level for reading. We must do better. One of my tasks is to screen potential ESOL students to determine their English language proficiency levels. I often test students midway through their kindergarten or first grade year. These students often still struggle just to recognize the beginning sounds in words, let alone decode or read an entire word accurately and fluently. Our English language learners across Maryland need the early warning system provided by the Ready to Read Act. Many ESOL students born in the U.S. are transferring to us from other Maryland school systems. Their lack of reading skills is not because they are newly arrived to the U.S. This bill would not only screen our youngest pupils in areas predictive of future reading ability, but also screen students who come into our system in second grade or higher if they were not previously screened for risks of reading difficulty. The Institute for Education Sciences Practice Guide, entitled Effective Literacy and English Language Instruction for English Learners in the Elementary Grades, reports consistent, strong evidence to support screening English learners for reading problems, providing small group interventions, and monitoring progress. The screeners ask students to manipulate speech sounds, which doesn't require a high level of English comprehension. As an ESOL teacher myself, I did not receive thorough preparation in the essential pre-reading and early literacy skills. For my own ESOL students who struggled to read, I often felt inadequate, and the advice I received from peers was uneven at best. We must assure that our ELs, who sometimes come to us with interrupted education or lack of literacy in the home language, are provided the reading interventions they need to become productive members of society. Thank you.
Hi, I am Dr. Fran Bauman. I'm an educational diagnostician, a teacher, an author, a creator of literacy materials, a former president of the International Dyslexia Association in Maryland, and I've taught courses to teachers at 5 different colleges. I'm currently training 700 teachers in Baltimore County Public Schools, 60 hours each, to address literacy issues. We're now on teacher 480, so we're making good progress. The Ready to Read Act that we are discussing here tonight is so incredibly important because we need to figure out who needs help. We know that waiting for kids to show us that they're failing takes years and years and years and years that they never ever get back. And we've created a situation where all of this is unnecessary. And a lot of these kids can be dealt with in regular general education, but they get into special ed because if you have a mild problem that's not being addressed, it becomes moderate. And if you have a moderate problem that's not being addressed, it becomes severe. And if you have a severe problem, you need help right away. But what we know is that when you give these screenings, and they're very easy to give. I am a tester, and I give these tests, and they are simple to give. Regular classroom teachers can give these tests. We know if we figure out who needs help, that the bulk of intervention will take place in the general education classroom. We do not need to hire any extra teachers. I think that's a really important point here. We're going to use the people that we have. And I'm sure you're aware that about 7 Thursdays ago, the Maryland State Department of Education insisted that we now must have teachers pass a literacy test before they can get certified in Maryland. It is a test that shows they know how to teach structured literacy. So they are going to be able to intervene. It is going to be a requirement. And so we know there's no need for extra staffing. We're going to save money in special education. In most of our districts, 50 to 60% of the kids are not reading proficiently. Some districts, it's 70%, over 80%. This is a crisis. We need to address it, and we can address it. 43 out of 50 states in this country have early identification laws. And so I would like Maryland to become number 44. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Pinsky and members of the committee. My name is Audrey Potter. I am a practicing school psychologist and the legislative chair for the Maryland School Psychologists Association, or MSPA. MSPA is a professional organization representing about 600 school psychologists throughout the state of Maryland. I am here today to voice our strong support for the Ready to Read bill. As a school psychologist, one of my primary responsibilities is conducting psychological evaluations of struggling students through the special education process. The most common referral concern is for reading difficulties. By the time students are evaluated through the special education process, they are often significantly behind. In fact, research shows that 75% of children who are behind in reading at the age of 9, which is at about 3rd or 4th grade, will continue to struggle with reading throughout their school career and may never catch up. As we have heard, this bill will require screening of specific skills that research demonstrates are highly predictive of reading success, an area in which Maryland currently lags behind many other states. According to 2018 PARCC results, almost 6 out of every 10 Maryland students did not meet the proficient standard in reading. Those students are then at risk of falling behind in every single academic area. Students who fall behind in reading are also at risk for secondary negative outcomes, including emotional concerns such as anxiety and depression, as well as behavioral difficulties that may manifest at school and at home. MSPA stands behind the Ready to Read bill because we are deeply committed to ensuring reading success for all students, and that goal is met with the universal screening protocol set forth in this bill. Screening tools are brief, easy-to-use measures that can be administered to all students in a relatively quick time frame. Successful screeners are valid, reliable, and demonstrate predictive power. They consistently and accurately measure reading skills and can predict future reading difficulties. Screening results can then be used to provide evidence-based, targeted interventions designed to address the specific areas of concern for each student before that student experiences significant reading failure. The screening and intervention requirements outlined in this bill are specific enough to be effective, while still allowing flexibility to individual school systems to select screening tools and interventions that fit their specific needs. For all of these reasons, MSPA stands in strong support of the Ready to Read bill and respectfully asks the committee for a favorable vote. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Pinsky and Senators. My name is Abigail Broker, and I am in the 11th grade at Centennial High School in Howard County. Thank you for this opportunity to share my experiences. I showed signs of dyslexia from the moment I could talk and well before entering school. But Texas did not screen for reading difficulties at the time. In 2nd grade, my school provided a formal evaluation which showed that I was dyslexic. I was put in small reading tutoring groups and other programs which the school provided because Texas did have laws in place to help with reading and dyslexia. In 5th grade, my family moved to Tennessee, but there were no laws to help me. They offered to put me in a special ed classroom with children who were not able to be in a regular classroom. I refused. I loved school and I loved to learn and wanted to be with my peers. I had to wake up at 5 a.m. most every morning for my mom to read my textbooks to me. There was a dyslexic private school in town, but with 5 kids and a military salary, my parents couldn't afford it. I worked very hard. Other than playing soccer, I did nothing else with my time but tried to get through schoolwork and learn to read. My parents moved to Howard County, Maryland, so that I could be in a public school, a good public school, where we were shocked to find out that Maryland had no laws or policies in place, so the school was limited on what they could say they could do to help me. That was 5 years ago. At the time, we learned that only 6 states had laws to support struggling readers. Now, there are 40 states, including Tennessee, where I moved from. If I had been screened at a young age, rather than struggling and getting further behind until I was finally screened at 8 years old, that would have made a huge difference for me. Texas passed an early screening law last year, but if I had grown up in only Maryland, I would have never been screened or given effective reading instruction. This is what I wish would become a reality for all children in Maryland. Albert Einstein once said, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it is stupid." Please support the Senate Bill 734 to give the children of Maryland a fair chance at success. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Erin Parker. I live in Howard County, a school district that many consider high performing. I was concerned that my son was struggling to read and write for several years until he was identified with dyslexia in the 2nd grade. Because the school did not screen for reading difficulties, Gavin lost over 3 years until I listened to my mommy gut and got him tested at great personal expense. Universal screening is step 1 in preventing reading failure. Screening tools are quick, targeted measures that help identify the specific areas of reading skills deficits. For example, my son has difficulty with blending and manipulating sounds. If he were screened, his teachers would know to focus on phonics and phonemic awareness. He also has deficits in rapid automatic naming, which means he has trouble quickly finding letters, symbols, sounds, words. This information helps teachers develop an appropriate plan for reading. Screening each year for reading risks allows schools to know who needs targeted supplemental instruction and interventions to support literacy development. How will school districts know who may need reading help if they aren't screening all students each year? The wait to fail model doesn't work for teachers, students, parents, or school systems. Teachers are doing their best to provide help to students. We must give them the tools they need to inform instruction and prevent academic gaps. The critical period for literacy development is before the age of 8, when the brain is more responsive to instruction. If my son had been screened, we would have known about his reading risks earlier and gotten him help in pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, and 1st grade, when it would have been the most impactful and could have avoided the need for special education. More than 25 states screen for risks of reading difficulty, including dyslexia. Why not Maryland? Please, I ask for your support for our children who aren't getting help before they fall behind. Vote yes for the Ready to Read Act.
Good evening. My name is Rebecca Evans. I ask you to vote in favor of Bill 374 and help children like my son who are refused the help they need by the school system. You've heard a lot of testimonies of success stories today. My son is not one of them. My son Tyson is 13 and he attends 6th grade in Anne Arundel County. He reads at a rate of 48 words per minute. He has a processing speed of less than 2%. In 4th grade, Tyson was evaluated by Hopkins and found to have specific learning disabilities in reading, math, Tourette's, and ADHD. However, Anne Arundel County refused to accept the diagnosis. In 5th grade, we finally got Anne Arundel County to test my son, and the test came back congruent that he had problems with fluency, executive function, and processing. But the school still refused to grant my son interventions. They refused an IEP and told us that even if our son does have a disability, it does not affect him in the classroom. I asked, how does reading at 48 words per minute not affect you in the classroom? It affects him every day at home. He cannot read a menu before the waiter comes back to tell her what he wants for dinner. He cannot read the street signs as we pass them. He cannot read the game cards on the playing games we play at home. It affects him every day. But since there's no standard for screening tools, the school can choose to ignore my son's disability in favor of his subjective grades. For 2 years, we've attempted to get accommodations. We hired a special education tutor at our own expense and proved his reading rate up from 24 words a minute. But the school claimed this improvement was proof that he still didn't need help. Finally, we filed for due process, but we lost. The judge cited my son's good grades once again. Within 2 weeks of the end of the case, we began receiving emails from his teachers. Tyson cannot complete his work. Tyson cannot keep up with his peers. Tyson is failing. Now, 3 months later, my son is failing. He comes home frustrated, angry, and in tears. I have no way to help him now. I cannot continue to afford a special education tutor. Why must my son fail before he gets the help he needs? Thank you.
To Rebecca, I've been there, so I know exactly what you're talking about. It's a scary feeling when you've done all you can and you can't really help your child.
Thank you.
We hope we can do something about this.
Yeah, I would also point out that the Kerwin Commission has explicit recommendations about reading in the dyslexic screening at early ages and RTI efforts at the early years, and actually putting a significant amount of money into the RTI effort and tutoring at early ages after the screening takes place. So regardless of this bill, the state is moving forward on not only the recommendations but funding them if we get Kerwin funded. So that's happening on a separate track besides this bill. And finally, Ms. Gough, I'm not sure if you're in the International Student Office or where you are, but Gloria O'Brien and Sylvia Hoke, if they're still there, say hello for me. Thank you. That concludes the work of this panel. We have the final panel. Proponents, Sarah Davis, Lillian Davis, Rosemary Kitzinger, and Sean Malone. And they will be followed by the opponents, John Willems, Renee Spence, Ashley Cook. After that, we'll move to Senator West's, Senator West's bill, 783.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Davis. I am with Parent Advocacy Consortium, the founder of Parent Advocacy Consortium, a grassroots organization that protects and supports the civil rights of our children with disabilities. I'm also the parent of 5 children, a military spouse, and 2 of our 5 children have dyslexia. So this particular bill is near and dear to our heart because if my children had been screened as this bill proposes, we would have gotten the information we needed at a much earlier age for my daughter Lily to allow us to intervene when it was the developmentally appropriate time to address features of dyslexia. Instead, we did not get the information until many years of asking the school and being denied, and finally paying at our own expense when she was 13 to get the right kind of evaluation to identify that she is indeed dyslexic. And now we are paying $165 a week to remediate something that would have taken about a quarter of the time and cost had it occurred when she was in the 1st to 2nd grade. But lucky for us, we get a do-over, and my 5th child, who is currently 6, was diagnosed very early with dyslexia at 5 years old. Unfortunately, again, due to the lack of tools available to Anne Arundel County, they have denied that she has dyslexia and have denied to do anything for her dyslexia. So while we are, again, placed on our family, our single-income military family, the burden of performing the remediation for dyslexia and teaching our daughter to read, at least we have the knowledge to be able to make that choice and that sacrifice, which we did not have for our daughter Lily. So my children are far from unique. Reading difficulties impact typically developing children as well as children with disabilities. And this bill is very broad in nature in that it is universal screening. We currently screen for vision, we screen for hearing, we used to screen for scoliosis in our schools, but for some reason we don't screen universally for reading. It seems like a very glaring gap given that reading is probably the most fundamental and sacred task that the school will undertake for our children. So I urge you to really make sure that this bill remains in integrity, to ensure that the tools used are valid tools, not tools that will provide us with useless information around our children, and to make sure that once the areas of need are identified, the proper instruction is made available. Thank you for your time.
Good evening. My name is Lillian Davis. I am a 9th grader South River High School. Only last year I was diagnosed with dyslexia at my parents' expense. The Anne Arundel County has continuously denied that I have had dyslexia, and they have never provided any interventions with it. Maryland children need dyslexia interventions so that they can learn from an early age how to read and how to confront dyslexia and overcome its challenges. With this bill, they would be able to do that, and so please support this bill.
Hi, my name's Rosemary Kitzinger. I am a resident of Carroll County, a mother of 4, and I'm going to talk about my youngest son, Colin, who is currently 10. Colin going through school, we saw in kindergarten and first grade and second grade he struggled to learn how to read and to write. And, we'd ask the teachers, are you concerned? Are you worried? No, he'll get it. He's a boy. He's just, the light bulb hasn't gone off. He'll get it. Well, by third grade, he didn't get it. And now, after we did private assessments, he was significantly behind. He was also frustrated, he was anxious, he had school avoidance behaviors, and he was bullied. He was 9 years old at this time. When we tried to acquire an IEP with our outside assessments, the school wanted more assessments. One of the assessments the school system psychologist wanted to do, they didn't actually own. So we requested an IEE because they didn't own the assessment, and she said it's the best to screen for this. The county chose to file due process against Colin because it's not against the parent, it's against the child. We spent 3 days in due process. The county spent $36,578 to not assess my child or allow him to be assessed or acknowledge that he had reading difficulties. It is ridiculous. We are not a family. We are a one-income family. We are not a family that can afford the tutoring, the private school, etc. But we have gone to great lengths to pull Colin from public school, which I'm a firm believer in, and place him in private school so he can receive the interventions. Because after all of that, they still didn't offer the interventions that he needed. So I'm going to make this simple. I'm a life member at Bethesda Chevy Chase Rescue Squad. I have been very actively involved over my earlier years before children. And as an EMT, we have 2 basic things we go on every call knowing. Without A, you don't have B. Without B, you don't have C. Airway, breathing, circulation. This is ABCs to me. Without A, reading, you don't have B, which is writing. And without B, A and B, you don't have C, which is a proper education. Also in the medical field, there's what's known as the golden hour of opportunity. So anybody who has a trauma, a stroke, a heart attack, we know within the first hour of an event happening, if we get a patient to the hospital and get the right interventions, they have a better chance of having a better outcome. Same thing with our children for reading. There's a golden hour of opportunity, and this is it. Please pass this bill and help our children.
Yep. Good evening. I usually testify on behalf of the client. I don't come here on behalf of the client today. I am Annapolis' dyslexic lobbyist. 40 years ago when we came to Montgomery County, my family moved, I entered public school for the first time, and I simply just sat in the back of the classroom. They were unable to teach me. Now, by the grace of God, my parents were speech-language pathologists, both of them. So I got a lot of work outside the classroom. Never on a college track. In fact, guidance counselors had me in courses that I could work in a restaurant. Through college, through graduate school, I struggled. And it wasn't until I started working with students that I learned how to learn myself. Dyslexia is not a disability. It's the disability of the school system and the inability to teach and identify these problems amongst these students. My son, Joshua Jones, would have been here with me today to testify as well. He is dyslexic. It's so hereditary. My stepson has it. But Joshua is a bright student who, fortunately, we had the resources to send him to the Odyssey School. When he went, he wasn't reading. He was behind grade level. He was behind in grade. Within a year, with the proper assessment and teaching, he was back on grade level. He will graduate on time, and it's just so needed in our public schools. It's shocking to me, 40 years later, we're no further along in assessing and addressing this issue. It's simple. And let me tell you, it's a long bill. The screening shouldn't be hard. We're your best looking, most athletic, brightest, most articulate students with the bad grades, because the teachers aren't able to teach us. This is not a hard issue. I get there's expense involved, but we have a whole group of very intelligent young men and women who are just being denied an access to the constitutional education that they are promised in this state, because we won't test and we won't address these issues. And with that, I submit and urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Question for this panel, seeing none. Thank you for your patience and your contribution. We're going to move to the opponents. I have, and I missed one earlier, I have John Willems, Renee Spence, Ashley Cook, and Mary Louise Collins.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, John Willems, representing the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, here today to testify in opposition to Senate Bill 734. Three primary reasons for opposing this legislation. One is that it is, in our opinion, unprecedented in scope and specificity relative to the types of screenings required, the extent of the specificity with regard to pre-K, K, and first grade levels, the specificity with regard to the interventions and strategies that need to be provided. It essentially looks like regulations in statute. This was much more true of the bill last year, which we did work through with the last year's sponsors to sort of winnow down and work toward a conference committee approach that would have shifted the burden of doing this to MSDE through the regulatory process with stakeholders in that arena, which this committee, many of you have heard, may advocate for an issue like this being addressed in that arena many times in the past. I want to focus also on the scope of this legislation and perhaps some things that could be addressed through drafting, but it essentially requires at some level all 30,000 pre-K kids getting assessed. And so that's the number of pre-K students we have. That number just about doubles once you're talking about first graders. But at some point you have to assess every child under this bill, and that is a massive amount. That adds up to somewhere between 312 days and 625 days of solid testing, whether you're talking about a 15-minute assessment for pre-K students or a 30-minute assessment for kindergartners. So relative to this committee's interest in limiting the amount of testing, this bill is certainly contrary to those initiatives. And then it's very, very expensive. And Mr. Chairman, as you referred to Kerwin, the fiscal note indicates that school systems, in making their best effort to look at the number of reading specialists and interventionist folks that would be required to implement this, again, very broad legislative mandate, the numbers are significant. And so based on scope and cost and our strong preference that an issue like this be dealt with in the regulatory arena and not codified in statute, we request an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, good evening, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Renee Spence. I'm here representing the Public School Superintendents Association. It's very difficult for me to sit here in front of you tonight and oppose Senate Bill 734. I started my career as a special education teacher. But the reason I'm here on behalf of the superintendents opposing this bill is that it's much too prescriptive. It's different from the conference committee report from last year, for those of you who weren't here. Senator Pinsky mentioned some of my testimony. Last year, the General Assembly passed Kerwin Light, so to speak, early literacy grants, $2.5 million to focus on K through 8 reading literacy with a focus on K through 3. This year, we're all anxiously awaiting Kerwin legislation, which again will be talking about working with struggling learners, transitional supplemental services, I believe it's called, with money attached, which basically is tutoring for our struggling learners. So it's not that we're opposed to this. We would like to see a coordinated effort of all the things that are coming forth out of the General Assembly that will address pre-K through 12 through Kerwin and the funding so that we can coordinate. Also, I do want you to believe that your school systems are assessing children early. We have the the KRA, the Kindergarten Reading Assessment. We also have reading programs that have assessments included as part of the reading program. So this is outside of the 2% assessment cap, which I don't understand that, because 2 or so years ago, we were putting a cap on assessments. I just think we need to coordinate our efforts in the best interest of all our students. Thank you.
Madam Vice Chairman.
Renee, you know, I always agreed most of the time with everything that you say, because we're usually on the same wavelength. But this time I don't, because we've got to fix this problem. You know, when I heard Sean testify 40 years ago, my son was 40 years ago. 40 years ago. And when you go and look into our juvenile facilities and into our prisons, that's where they are. Because nobody helped them when they were not properly screened. They did not know. I had to threaten to sue Board of Education to get my child into a program. And he did not, and it didn't last long, because they put him in there for 2 semesters and put him back into the public schools, into DEC. And I didn't have the money to send him to Odyssey or to Jessamy schools. Those were the schools that were for dyslexic children. The reality is that we have got to do better. We've got to find a way, Mr. Chairman, when we're looking at this bill, to see what can be done in this bill. Maybe not to the extent what was drafted, but we've got to do more than we're doing now, because we're not doing it far enough. We're not going far enough. Too many of our children are failing. And when they're in what I would say, their self-esteem is broken, and when they can't get there, it's a horrible feeling. I mean, many times when children come and testify, I cry, because I remember what I went through, and I remember what I went through with my son. And so we've got to do better. We really have to.
I agree, Madam Vice Chair, and I do think the Kerwin Commission did spend a lot of time looking at this and offering some recommendations. That was my point. Thank you.
Quick question. Both of you mentioned work done on this bill last year. There was, between the House and the Senate, a consensus. Not all the advocates were happy with it, but there was a version that just ran out of time, I think, on the last day of session last year. You're signing up in opposition to this bill. If that bill were the one before us today, would you be opposing it or amending it or what?
Senator, to be candid, in a early session meeting with the staff of the Senate sponsor and with the House sponsor and with all of the advocates, I referred specifically to the conference committee bill from last session as a goal that MABE would be willing to work toward this session.
I also agree. I think the bill, the conference committee bill from last year, addressed the right to read and reading screening, but was not as prescriptive, because we did talk about various school systems and the different reading programs that they do use. So it wasn't as tightly written as this one.
And again, I can't actually recall all of it, but it did include required screening, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Once again, Mary Louise Collins, I don't see her, and Ashley Cook. Okay.
I'm sorry, Ashley Cook had to leave.
Okay. That concludes Senate Bill 734. Thank all of you who stayed this late to testify. Now we go to Senator West. 783, human papillomavirus vaccine, information and informed consent. I'm going to call up his panel. Dr. Bart Klassen, Joe Fitzgerald, Sarah Cusack, Dr. Carol Adams, Megan Montgomery. After that panel, we'll go to the opponents, Julie Worcester, Pam Casemeyer, Robin Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my panel is on the way. They've been
just to the committee. We're still considering trying to knock out some bills afterwards. That has not been decided yet, so we may still have a voting session.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My panel is on the way, and they'll be here momentarily. I feel like it's been hours since I was before you before. In fact, it has been hours since I was before you before. So, yeah. Come on, team. Let's get up here. Mr. Chair, this is a very simple bill about a